Okay, there's so many points that David brought up. I'll try my best to answer as many as I can in my first rebuttal period. He brought up the verse from Surah 61, verse 14, regarding the Quran saying that the followers of Jesus will be uppermost. Well, Tafsir al-Qurtubi, it says that Ibn Abbas said, Allah strengthened those who believed in the time of Jesus by having Muhammad's religion be uppermost over the religion of the disbelievers. Because when Islam came and became uppermost, it strengthened the image of the disciples and the true followers of Jesus, that they are the ones who are following the truth, and they are the ones who are going to heaven. And Tafsir al-Tabari, it says, so we strengthened those who believed from the two tribes of Bani Israel over their enemies, those who disbelieved in Muhammad, peace be upon him, for what he came to attest to them. That is that Jesus is the slave of Allah and His Messenger, and to expose the lies of those who say that He is God, and those who say that He is the Son of Allah the Most High. So they, the believing tribe, have been made victorious over the disbelieving enemies. What the verse is trying to say is that when Islam came and clarified the truth of the matter, and exposed the falsehood and declared what is true, it made uppermost those who were following the true religion. You shouldn't take it as a meaning strengthening them in a military sense, that strengthened and made their status uppermost. In regards to the satanic verses, and I'm happy that David is providing more scholarly arguments. I'm happy that he's doing this. He mentioned Ibn Hajar, and he went to the Mursal narrations. But let me quote Sheikh Dr. Imad Sayyid al-Sharbini in his book, Radd al-Shubuhat. I'm not going to read it all because it's a long title. He responds to Ibn Hajar's appeal to the Mursal narrations. He said, first of all, as Ibn Hajar himself admits, not all accept Mursal narrations. Just to clarify, a Mursal narration is a narration that is a broken chain, and it's missing the gap between the 2nd century Muslims and the Prophet, peace be upon him. Imam Muslim, in his introduction to Sahih Muslim, said that Mursal narrations cannot be held as authoritative. Ibn Salah said that Mursal narrations are just like weak hadith. They cannot be used as evidence unless you have authentic narrations from somewhere else to strengthen it. Different schools of thought have put different conditions in regards to accepting Mursal narrations. Thus, not all Muslims are required to believe the story, for it cannot be proven to be authentic in a clear-cut manner. Secondly, acceptance of Mursal narrations, according to all scholars, are only debated when it comes to matters of jurisprudence, not in matters of theology that demand clear-cut proof and certainty. Certainly, the satanic verses might play a theological, is related to theology, not to matters of jurisprudence, which the Mursal narrations cannot satisfy the requirement that we need for theological standards. Now, regarding the satanic verses, David mentioned the story, and he was quoting scholars that accepted the authenticity of the story, and he said, well, you see, Ibn Taymiyyah, whom Salafis highly respect, said that the story is authentic. Yeah, but so, I mean, quote me one Salafi that said Ibn Taymiyyah is infallible. I mean, us Salafis today even acknowledge that Ibn Taymiyyah made not a lot, but some really bad theological mistakes in some of his verdicts. But we don't take that from him. So yes, I acknowledge Ibn Taymiyyah as a great scholar, but let me tell you other scholars who are highly respectable and have said that the story is weak. Ibn Sa'd, Qadi Ayyad, Al-Thalabi, Ibn Kathir, who's a Salafi, Abu Saud, Ibn Khuzaymah, Al-Bayhaqi, Ibn Hazm, Dr. Mohar Ali, a modern Salafi, he likes to quote modern Salafis, in his book, The Biography of the Prophet and the Orientalists, pages 683 to 702, he shows that the text of the various narrations regarding the satanic verses story are different when they are compared with each other. Keeping minor differences aside, there are major differences in regards to the occasion of the incident, nature of the Prophet's alleged act, wording of the alleged satanic verses, and their effect or sequel. So here, we shouldn't be appealing to authority. Well, my scholar said this and your scholar said that. Who has the evidence? At the end of the day, we don't have a fully connected chain for the story. But we have over 30 different narrations. Well, 30 different fabricated narrations are still 30 different fabricated and weak narrations. It doesn't strengthen your argument. If you have 30 false witnesses, you have 30 false witnesses. If you can prove that you have one reliable witness, then fine. But you're just adding more water to buckets that have holes in them. It doesn't matter how many narrations you have. If they're not reliable, they're not reliable. Now, he said, let's apply the historical method. He said, first of all, what does the earliest source says? I don't know how many times I have to say this to David, but early only means early. There's early falsehood and there's early truth. So we're interested in early truth. He said, there are multiple different sources for this? Well, I don't think so. If you think about the Mursal narration very carefully, what does it mean? It means that there is one person missing in the link to fully connect the link. Now let's say that that one person, now you have 3 different narrations. All of them are broken. Isn't it possible that the missing link is the missing link for all 3 narrations? So if that missing link happens to be a weak narrator, that would make all 3 of your narrations weak. So you can't really demonstrate that that they are really independent. He said the principle of embarrassment. But you see, the principle of embarrassment would only apply to someone who has no motive to do such a thing. David would have to demonstrate that the person in the missing link is a Muslim, that he's not a hypocrite, that he's a pious Muslim, and that we can demonstrate this. But if we don't even know who the person is, and he might as well be a hypocrite, who is known to be a hypocrite, you can't really apply the principle of embarrassment here. He said, you see, Ibn Hisham took it out because maybe he didn't like the story. Well, actually, as far as I know, Ibn Hisham took out what he thought was weak from Ibn Ishaq's seerah. I don't know if he did a good job doing so, but I know that he didn't take things out just because he felt like it. I think he took things out because he thought that they were weak. And that would actually contradict what David said in regards to none of the early scholars condemned the satanic verses. It was just something that came later. In regards to the suicide attempts of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, again, these are all from weak narrations. Well, and first, let me clarify. Even if the satanic verses story, even if it was true, at the end of the day, what does it really prove? It proves that the Prophet of God had Satan whisper a verse into his ear. He made him utter that false statement, and then God later on sent the angel to vindicate the Prophet. Now he's saying, well, how can Muhammad distinguish between the two? Well, first of all, if he really is a prophet of God, at the end of the day, God will make sure that he knows. Secondly, if it really was Satan inspiring the Quran from the very beginning, then why would Satan expose himself at that particular time? It doesn't make sense. In regards to the suicide attempts, this story is found in 3 different sources. First one is in Ibn Sa'd's Kitab al-Tabaqat. But again, and in Tarikh al-Tabari. But again, these narrations are weak. Muslim scholars don't accept them. The third one, interestingly enough, is found in Sahih Bukhari. But there's one thing that I want David to be aware of, and even Muslims to be aware of. When Muslim scholars say that Sahih Bukhari is very reliable, they're only talking about the fully connected chains in Sahih Bukhari. There are broken chains, there are footnotes in Sahih Bukhari, and our scholars do not recognize them as being reliable. And there are several examples of these kind of things, and this is one example of them. Imam al-Zuhri said that Aisha passed this story, but there's a 50-year gap between Aisha and Imam al-Zuhri. So who is the missing link? Again, it's a broken chain, it's a weak narration. Again, I just want to clarify, I'm not declaring a Sahih Bukhari hadith weak here. Muslim scholars recognize that the fully connected chains of Sahih Bukhari are authentic. But sometimes he has broken chains and footnotes in his book, which Muslim scholars do not hesitate to declare as weak. Regarding the black magic, David said, well, one time someone tried to put black magic on me, it didn't work, but hey, it worked on Muhammad, so what gives? Well, first of all, Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the best role model for Muslims to follow. And we could understand and know what to do under certain circumstances by looking at how the Prophet, peace be upon him, underwent these circumstances. And the Quran even says that the prophets are tested the most, and then the pious believers. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, going under such a crucial test. But what effect did this black magic have on him? Did it affect the revelation? We see no evidence for this. The Prophet, peace be upon him, just said that he used to imagine that he was with all of his wives, but he really wasn't. So that's the limit, that's the extent that the effect had on him. And also, we learn from the story that if you ever did get influenced by black magic, you should pray to God in order to cure you, and not resort to other different methods. And again, that story actually proves that Muhammad is a prophet of God, because how would the prophet have known that the Jew actually put the honeycomb, not the honeycomb, the comb in the well? Angel Gabriel told him. So accept the whole story, not part of the story. He said that Islam took some practices from before. Again, Islam did not claim that it has brought everything new with it. He said, well, Muhammad kissed the black stone. Yeah, but what's the difference between him kissing the black stone and the pagans from before kissing the black stone? They would seek blessings from the black stone. The Prophet didn't seek blessings from the black stone. He would just kiss it out of respect for it. And Umar bin Khattab said, after he kissed the black stone, I am only kissing you because I saw Muhammad kissing you. And that is it. If it really was a pagan practice, then the Prophet should have taught his companions, kiss the black stone, seek blessings from it. It could help you. Regarding the pilgrimage, yeah, but the pagans went to the pilgrimage naked. Islam came and corrected it and enhanced that practice. Praying 5 times a day. Well, did they pray at the same exact times as us? Did they pray the same exact way as us? I see no problem with why would Allah take these practices from all over the place, enhance them and uplift them, and then have the Muslims practice them permanently. He said self-serving revelations. I think David is contradicting himself. He's saying, well, it's suspicious. Why do you see these self-serving revelations? Why did Muhammad have more than 4 wives? But David said that he believed that Muhammad was sincere. If you believe that he was sincere, then that means Muhammad didn't have a motive to fabricate the religion. If Muhammad didn't have the motive to fabricate the religion, then what's your argument? And again, I gave so many examples in my opening statement that were showing revelations were really not self-serving. And why did Prophet Muhammad have more than 4 wives? Well, the Prophet, peace be upon him, his wives were the mothers of the believers. They are our spiritual mothers, and it doesn't behove that they would marry someone else. Muhammad's marriage to Zainab. Again, regarding the dress and the wind, again, these are just fabricated sources. But really, look at the whole story here. Muhammad got Zayd married to Zainab. If he really liked Zainab, he would have married her from the beginning. He hooked both of them up. He's the one that got them married. And not only that, Zayd and Zainab already had problems with their marriage before he even went to the Prophet. He went up to the Prophet and he told him, I'm having problems with Zainab. And he was going to divorce her anyways. And he was going to divorce her anyway, so it's not because of that they got divorced. And Muhammad married her to show that it is not forbidden in Islam to marry the wife of your adopted son, because your adopted son in reality isn't your son. I'm surprised that David he didn't get rid of all of his atheist biases. But he's been a Christian for over a decade now. I thought he would have gotten rid of them. All these arguments, angels don't enter a house with a dog, Satan in someone's nose, yawning is from Satan. These are matters of the unseen. I could give some examples from the Old Testament where things sound pretty weird. And but I don't want to resort to mocking. But again, these are matters of the unseen. Now, I would encourage you to actually read some of the hadith commentary on some of these narrations. Like, for example, when it says that Satan urinated in his ears, what the Prophet was really trying to emphasize was that Satan humiliated you and defeated you because he made sure that you didn't wake up for the Fajr prayer. Or For example, fever is from hell. I actually have an article on my website, and I quoted Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani's commentary on this, and he's saying there's a difference of opinion regarding its relation to hell, to fever. It was said that the relation is literal. Therefore, the heat felt by one who suffers from a fever is a part of hell, which Allah made to appear through means that He has measured so that the slaves heed to His lesson. Similarly, types of delight and elation are part of paradise's delight, and Allah made these to appear in this life as a lesson and a reminder. It was also said that this hadith is a figure of speech. Thus, in this case, it would mean that the heat of fever is similar to the heat of hell to alert one's inner self to the intensity of the heat of the fire, and that the heat of fever is similar to the fire's radiance in that it touches those near it. So again, we should read the commentary, see how the scholars understood this. Even if it was literal, these are things of the unseen. It really cannot be proven nor disproven scientifically. Regarding dogs being killed, I have an article on this on my website, and I provide all the narrations, and the conclusion that I have reached is that when you look at it in context, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was talking at a specific time in a certain context in which he wanted some dogs who were spreading rabies to be killed. And but we don't apply this anymore today as Muslims. Let me see here. He said, well, you know, Muslims say that there are 7 levels of heaven. Again, these are matters of the unseen. Even us Muslims today don't really understand what it means by 7 levels of heaven. Is the first level of heaven the sky, or is it the universe? Again, these are matters of the unseen that we ourselves don't really understand. Science can't touch that realm. It seems like David wasn't really happy with his performance in the first debate. That's why he had to use the second debate to respond to some unanswered arguments that I put forth. He's saying, why does Bassam have a problem with the expensive perfume that Jesus had? Again, maybe it's my fault I didn't clarify myself. Most of those arguments that I brought up, I personally don't have a problem with them. I actually got these arguments from other websites or from other people. The point I was trying to make in that debate is to say that morality is subjective. Some people would view things that Jesus did, the biblical Jesus did, as moral or immoral, and it was subjective. I think that the biblical Jesus is a moral person. But if you want me to be strict about the matter, I would say, well, even though Jesus was going to get buried and died, why the expensive perfume? Get some ordinary perfume. But again, I'm not really interested in pushing that point. Regarding the parents, he said, why did Jesus speak to his mother in a rude way? That was my argument that I put. And I actually believe that it was wrong for Jesus to do that. Doesn't Islam teach that you should take religion over your family? Yes, but you see, like for example, Islam would say, if your parents are going to fight you or try to kill you, of course you have the right to kill them. You're not going to say, yeah, it will be my parents come and kill me. But I think if Jesus should have demonstrated more patience with his mother and said to her and tried to explain to her what his mission was and that he was a prophet of God. He didn't have to speak to her in such a rude way. He said, well, how many caravans did Muhammad rob? Okay, provide those examples. I have a feeling that you're talking about during the time of Badr, but I'm going to let you provide the specific examples for that. The Matthew-Luke contradiction regarding the appearances, well, I don't think it's reconcilable. Jesus commanded the disciples to not leave Jerusalem until they received the Holy Spirit, according to the book of Acts, chapter 1, verses 4 to 5. They were baptized on the day of Pentecost, which was 50 days after the Passover. And according to Acts, chapter 1, verse 3, Jesus stayed on earth for 40 days after his supposed resurrection. So that makes it impossible for Jesus to have met the disciples in Galilee. Again, I'm going to encourage David to ignore the first debate. The first debate is gone. Let's focus on this debate. But I guess you're forcing me to answer this. He's saying in Luke 24, Jesus saying, it is written. No, David, 61 times in the New Testament, whenever an author says, it is written, you would actually see that he's quoting something from the Old Testament. This is the only exception. When it says, it is written, and then you give a statement, that means that the statement should actually be there. So I don't find your argument, your response to be reliable. He's saying stars are missiles to chase devils. I don't know how David could possibly prove that to be wrong. Stars do move. Isn't it possible that God could use moving stars to chase the devil? Again, we can't see the devil. We don't know the nature of how God uses stars to chase devils. We don't know. These are matters of the unseen. I'll finish responding to the rest of David's arguments in my next rebuttal.
All right. I'm going to break this up into the three categories of arguments. Spiritual issues that I've mentioned, the very human elements of Islam, and the Psalms arguments, whether we can see anything divine in the teachings of Islam. Regarding Muhammad's rejection of Jesus' death, resurrection, and deity, I brought up the verse. Said Muhammad made Jesus' followers uppermost. Well, what does that sound like? According to Bassam, there must have been some original followers of Jesus who were made uppermost in status. We have no records of any such people ever existing. As far back as we go, we have two groups. As far as the first century is concerned, we have people who rejected Jesus and wanted him dead on charges of blasphemy, and we had his followers who worshipped him and believed he died on the cross for their sins. Why would God take these people who believed a false message, Jesus' followers, and make them uppermost? I don't see any reason why. But if you have a God who deceives people, I guess things like this are possible. Regarding the satanic verses, he says that not all people accept mursal narrations. Yeah, but there are 3, and there are 27 additional narrations. And so we have 30 chains of transmission. He says, well, maybe all of them were just made up. That's the point, and that was actually Ibn Taymiyyah's point, is that it's pretty difficult to believe that all of these separate chains of transmission, with all of these separate people coming from all of these different places, are all made up by the same person, or that different people are all inventing the same sort of story. That's ridiculous. He says, well, this is related to theology, so it can't be accepted. Well, this is a historical matter. Either it happened in history or it didn't happen in history, and we figure out what happened in history using the historical method. If we're going to use the method of Isnad, we have to use a more sophisticated method than just looking at a chain. And Ibn Taymiyyah came up with a more sophisticated method. Bassam says, well, Ibn Taymiyyah is not infallible. True, but my point is not, well, he said it, therefore it must be true. Ibn Taymiyyah, you guys love him, therefore it must be true. That's not the point. The point is, the method of Isnad is, as Muslims use it, only examines one chain. He had a more sophisticated method of examining narrations, which allowed him to combine them. And when he did this, he concluded that the story is authentic. Bassam said that other scholars reject the story. Yeah, and we know why. Again, Shahab Ahmed explained what happened later on. A couple of centuries later, Muslims came up with a different theology that said God will protect the prophets from that sort of activity. And then they began looking at these narratives in a different way. But before that, it was taken as given. He says, well, these could be 30 fabricated narrations. Not according to Ibn Taymiyyah. I mean, think about it. You've got 30 different chains of transmission all saying, all giving a similar story. What are the chances that this is all made up and that no one caught on to the people inventing this story? He said that early only means early. It seems that Bassam just has no respect for early testimony. If our earliest sources are the Gospels, if our earliest source is a creed that comes within 5 years, who cares? That's meaningless. What matters is something is a book that came 600 years later. If Ibn Ishaq is our earliest story in Islam, who cares what it is? The only thing that matters is the stories that our scholars have approved of later on. And this is very contrary to the historical method, which favors early testimony, because it's less likely to be embellished. He said, prove that there's no motive to invent. Again, these were Muslims, and the story came from so many different ways. You'd have to say Muslims all over the place suddenly came up with the idea to invent stories about Muhammad delivering revelations from the devil. I mean, if you can believe that, you can believe anything. He says that Ibn Hisham took out only weak narratives. Wrong. At the end of his version of Ibn Ishaq, he says he took out material that would be offensive to Muslims. And the satanic verses certainly were becoming so by his time. So So as far as history is concerned, the Satanic Verses account is as good as gold as far as Ibn Taymiyyah and his more sophisticated method of hadith criticism are concerned. The story is as good as gold. Modern scholar, the world's leading authority on these sources, a Harvard scholar, Shahab Ahmed, he thinks this story is as good as gold. We can only reject it by being biased. Regarding the black magic, he says that, well, Muslims can only know what to do if Muhammad goes through it. So we know what to do regarding black magic because Muhammad went through it. Well, couldn't Muhammad have just told people this is what you do if black magic is cast on you? I mean, think about it. Let's suppose you're walking down the street and you see me walk out in front of a bus and get hit by a car. You say, David, why did you just get hit by that car? And I say, well, I had to teach my children to look both ways before crossing the street. That would make no sense at all. You would say, no, why didn't you just tell them? Why didn't you just really tell them? That's all Muhammad needed to do. Regarding the sources of Islam, he says Muhammad kissed the black stone. Oh, he says people kissed the black stone because Muhammad did it. Right, but the question is, why is Muhammad performing this practice that the pagans practice? There's no real reason for it. There's no divine command, hey, you have to go around kissing a stone. Normally this would be condemned in Christianity and Islam as idolatry, but suddenly Islam makes an exception, and that exception just happens to be a pagan practice that was popular in Mecca. This looks like a human revelation. He says, well, there are differences between the way Muslims do these practices and the way others did them. Great, the point is, Muhammad kept these practices and they were pagan practices. Regarding the self-serving revelations, he said I contradicted myself because I said I believe that Muhammad was sincere. Well, no, I didn't contradict myself. I do believe Muhammad was sincere. I don't believe that he sat back and said, how am I going to get more than 4 wives? Here's what I'm going to do. I believe that he wanted more than 4 wives, and then the revelation came, not through any intentional deception on his part, but just that, I mean, these revelations were coming inside of Muhammad's head. And think about Aisha. Aisha herself noticed this. Aisha said, when Muhammad received one of these revelations, she said, the Lord hastens to fulfill your desires. It seems like she noticed something that I have noticed too. Now, he says that the story of Zainab was fabricated. Well, I mean, we have quite a few references to this story. And you have some verses in the Quran that you're going to have to explain if you want to say that this story just came out of nowhere. He says Muhammad got married. Muhammad got them married, so he couldn't have been interested in her. No, Muhammad got them married earlier on in his prophetic career. And I've said over and over again in debates, I like Muhammad for most of his life. I really look at Muhammad and say, all right, this is a good guy. It's the last several years that I have a problem with. And this is when we have events like the story of Zainab. He said Zainab, they were already having problems. He was going to divorce her. No, he was going to divorce her when she started despising him. But the reason she started despising him was because she found out that Muhammad was interested in her. He said Muhammad did it to show people that it was okay to marry the divorced wives of their adopted sons. Again, does a prophet have to do this? Can't he just say, by the way, it's okay to marry the divorced wives of your adopted sons? And by the way, how many people struggle with this problem? So, Muhammad could have just commanded it again. You don't need to step out in front of a bus to teach your kids to look both ways before walking across the street. Now, as far as Bassam's arguments, I brought up the silly teachings. He said, well, there are things in the Old Testament that sound weird. He said we need to read the commentaries on these passages, you know, Satan urinating in your ears and so on. Great, that's my point exactly. My point is that when he appeals to the biblical text, there's no concern for context. There's no concern for any way these texts might be reconciled. There's no attempt at an honest assessment of the evidence. It's just, well, it looks like, you know, it looks on the surface like there could be a problem here, so I'm just going to say there's a problem. And when we turn to Islam, his approach is, no, you have to look at commentaries and you have to think about all these things. That's an inconsistency. He says, what's the problem with, can't God use moving stars to catch devils or to attack devils? Well, the problems in this passage are bigger than this. One, in context, it's claiming that stars are actually shooting stars. So when you see a shooting star that hit a devil, it's because God hurled a star. Shooting stars are not stars. They're completely different astronomical phenomena. So this passage makes no sense. And by the way, it makes no sense to say a little meteor, physical, in the physical world, attacks spiritual entities. So we still have nothing but problems here. Now, regarding the argument from scientific accuracy, he appealed to a couple passages. I showed that none of these passages add any scientific evidence to Islam. And I responded that we don't have any good reasons to take these passages as anything miraculous. But there's an even bigger problem with this argument. What do you do with all the scientific inaccuracies in the Quran and the Hadith? These things don't generally bother me, but if you're making an argument... 30 seconds? Is it 20 minutes?
No, we're actually in 8 minute.
No.
You said it's a 20.
Okay.
You want first?
Yeah.
All right, so you have 20 minutes.
Yeah, he still has 6.
12?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you still have 9 minutes left.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
All right.
All right, 9 minutes. What do we do with all the scientific inaccuracies in the Quran and the Hadith? In Sahih al-Bukhari, number 3320, Muhammad tells his followers, if a fly, this is the famous one with Jalal, if a fly falls into your drink, dunk the fly in the drink, because one of the fly's wings has a disease, but the other wing has the cure for the disease. Muslims have tried to make this scientifically accurate. It's not. Even some of the experiments they appeal to, there are some beneficial microbes that you can get from a fly. This does not mean you dunk the fly, because then you're getting all the bad stuff as well. So flies spread diseases. If you get the wrong fly, you're going to get sick. You might even die. According to Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, Muhammad told his followers that Adam was 90 feet tall and that people have been shrinking since the time of Adam. Is that true? No. It's physically impossible for a human being to be anywhere near that tall. Blood could not be pumped that distance, no matter how big and how strong a heart is. In Sunan Abu Dawud, number 67, we read about a situation in which some Muslims needed water. They asked Muhammad whether it was okay to use water from the well Buddha, which was filled with dead dogs, used menstrual cloths, and human excrement. Muhammad replied, truly, water is clean and is not defiled by anything. Not even by dead animals and human waste? Again, I'm not trying to make fun of Muhammad in any way. I'm simply saying you cannot get evidence for Muhammad by appealing to scientific accuracy, because for everything you point to as a miraculous scientific claim, there are scientific problems. And so you would expect people to come to this, to reinterpret everything that looks wrong, and to accept whatever looks like it might be right, but no one's going to do that. So we read things like that in the Hadith. In the Quran, we have Surah 1886, which tells us that Alexander the Great traveled so far west, he found a place where the sun sets. This is confirmed in the commentaries. So according to the Quran, the sun sets in a pool of murky water. We've already talked about Surah 67:5. Stars are missiles that God uses to shoot demons. We have ants talking to Solomon in Surah 27. In Surah 86, we have sperm being produced between the ribs and the spine. And throughout the Quran, we have passages telling us that humans go through a blood clot stage. Now, the Muslim method of investigating these passages seems to be, if anything can be interpreted as a correct statement, it's clear proof that the Quran is the Word of God. If something looks obviously false, Muhammad must mean something else. Explain it away, it must mean something else. Reinterpret it. Now, that's one thing if you're Muslims, but you can't expect other people who are investigating the evidence for your religion to be willing to make those moves. Any religion, you could defend any religion. You could open the Book of Mormon and say, all right, anything that looks right, I'm going to interpret it at face value. Anything that looks wrong, I'm going to reinterpret it. So there's no reason to accept the argument from scientific accuracy. Now, as far as the argument from fulfilled prophecy, I've said that if you want us to accept the prophecies that Bassam has offered, all the more we'd have to accept the prophecies of someone like Nostradamus. No one was willing to do that, and so I find it difficult to take this argument seriously when you wouldn't apply the same criteria to someone else. But there are even bigger problems. One, Muhammad himself rejected this sort of reasoning. In Sahih al-Bukhari, number 5762, some people asked Allah's messenger about the foretellers, people who could predict the future. Muhammad said, they are nothing. People said, oh, Allah's messenger, sometimes they tell us of a thing which turns out to be true. Notice the claim, Muhammad, sometimes they say something and that thing comes to pass. Here was Muhammad's answer. He said, a jinn, devil, snatches that true word and pours it into the ears of his friend the foreteller as one puts something into a bottle. The foreteller then mixes the word with 100 lies. He says that a jinn snatches a true word. So according to Muhammad, even if you came up, even though these people were saying things that were coming true, you get these things from the devils. This is confirmed in Sahih al-Bukhari, number 3288. The Prophet said, while the angels talk amidst the clouds about things that are going to happen on earth, the devils hear a word of what they say and pour it into the ears of a foreteller, of a person predicting the future, as one pours something into a bottle, and they add 100 lies to that word. So demons hear something that's true, and they pass this information on to foretellers. And so according to Muhammad, you shouldn't accept this argument because you can get this not only from angels speaking the truth, but also from devils, and therefore the argument has to be rejected. Now, just to be clear, I don't believe that Muhammad ever predicted the future more accurately than anyone in this room could predict it. I could say a lot of things right now, and sooner or later some of those things are going to come true. But here's the thing, even if Muhammad had predicted all sorts of events, and even if his predictions had come true, Muhammad claimed that people can get these things from demons. The demons mix accurate prophecies with lies. Perhaps lies like, Jesus never died on the cross. Jesus was only a prophet. As we've seen, we have good reasons to believe that Muhammad was influenced by evil forces, the satanic verses, black magic. So there's just no way this argument is ever going to work. But there's still even further problems with this argument. What do you do when Muhammad says things that just don't happen, or that can't happen? Sahih Muslim number 7051. Anas reported that a person asked Allah's messenger, may peace be upon him, as to when the last hour would come. So when's the last hour going to come? He had in his presence a young boy, the Ansar, who was called Muhammad. Allah's messenger said, if this young boy lives, if he doesn't get killed in battle or something, he may not grow very old till he would see the last hour coming to you. So as long as this kid doesn't die in battle or something like that, if he lives, he's not going to grow very old until he sees the last hour coming. That never happened. And there are other things that can't be fulfilled. Bassam picks all of these things out of, by the way, Muhammad said tons of things. Muhammad said tons of things about that would happen in the future, and he picks the ones that seem like they sound correct. But there are other things that aren't going to happen. Sahih al-Bukhari, number 7116, Allah's messenger said, the hour will not be established till the buttocks of the women of the tribe of Daus move while going around Dhul Khalasa. The Muslims burned that building to the ground. It doesn't exist anymore. There's no way this prophecy can even be fulfilled. Sahih al-Bukhari, number 7119, Allah's messenger said, soon the river Euphrates will disclose the treasure, a mountain of gold. So whoever will be present at that time should not take anything of it. According to this, very soon after his time, there was supposed to be a mountain of gold revealed by the Euphrates. That hasn't happened. You could still say, well, you know, soon reveals to very far off in this instance. I wouldn't have much of a problem with that. The point is, you can't get much evidence out of these kind of arguments. And I just want to point out, if you, again, I don't believe that Muhammad predicted anything amazing about the future. But if he did, assuming he does one day, when something really amazing comes true, think about it. You believe that God deceives people into believing false things. If you're going to accept God deceiving people into believing false things, all the more you should be willing to accept the idea that demons would deceive people into false things, just as Muhammad himself said. So we can look at a couple of these prophecies. He says people will compete to build high buildings. Does it take anything miraculous to know that? No, you just have to know human nature. People were competing to build high buildings before Muhammad's time. The Temple of Herod was 15 stories high in the 1st century. So there's nothing miraculous here. And on these other things, so people will, Muslims will come to drink alcohol. People will commit open sexual intercourse. Here you don't have to know anything about the future. You just have to know something about human nature. And we know that human beings sin. We know that if you give them the opportunity, human beings are going to sin. So what are the odds that in all the future, and all the billions of people that would exist, some of these people are going to do things if you give a long list of things. Well, pretty good. Some of these things are bound to happen. I don't see anything miraculous here. I don't see anything divine in the teachings of Muhammad.
Okay, thank you, David. I don't know how I'll be able to catch up with you, but I'll try my best. Okay. You said Muslims assume that everything coming from Paul is false, so why should I believe what Muhammad said? Well, you haven't proven to... Oh, okay.
Sorry, just give me 10 seconds. We're
Yeah, sure,
gonna put a new
That little disc will record for 5 hours?
No. He had there's internal...
6 hours, actually.
Oh, okay. So it takes disk in addition to a hard drive.
Yeah, this is only for 30 minutes.
Actually, that one's for 6 hours because it kept recording.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. David said, okay, start the time now. David said that Muslims assume that everything that comes from Paul is false. So why should he believe what Muhammad said? But again, going back to the previous debate, David really didn't give any affirmative arguments proving that Paul was a prophet of God. And the statements that I would like David to believe that were uttered by Muhammad are these statements of prophecy. So these are affirmative arguments for the prophet of Muhammad. He didn't really provide any affirmative arguments for the prophethood, if you want to call Paul a prophet, of Paul. He said, well, in the previous debate, you quote scholars against me, so why can't I quote scholars against you? You can quote scholars against me, but prove to me that the arguments that the scholars used are valid. Now, for example, when I quoted scholars against you regarding, let's say, the authorship of the Gospels, many of these scholars that I quoted, in their statements, they are saying, most scholars today agree that the traditional view regarding the authorship of the New Testament. So, I'm not quoting one scholar, I'm just quoting one scholar who is saying that many scholars are saying that, whatever was going on. He's saying, well, what about Aristotle and the whole octopus accuracy? Yeah, but Aristotle also made mistakes. And Aristotle never claimed to be God, and did Muhammad, peace be upon him, have the ability to perform scientific studies and research like Aristotle? He's saying, well, Bassam, why don't you accept the Isaiah 53 prophecy? Again, we're going to the previous debate. As for Isaiah 53, this has been a long debate between Christians and Jews. The Jews can interpret it in a perfect way so that it does refer to the nation of Israel. And also I quoted Dr. William Lane Craig, who even admits that these prophecies are not clear unless you have presuppositions that Christianity is true. I'm not going to speak any more on this. He said, what's the big deal regarding that prophecy? Oh, followers will be playing the banjo. No, the point is, he said that Muslims will make it permissible. Not that Muslims will sin, and Muslims will sin and they will drink alcohol. Muslims will sin and they will play music. No, he said that Muslims will make it permissible. So that's something completely different. Regarding the sensory of the skin, I don't see why it's logical, even though someone would burn, that he would know that after his skin, he's looking at himself after the skin has been removed, he doesn't feel any more pain, and that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would have known that. I would have thought logically that the person would keep feeling pain as long as he is conscious and that he is alive. But no, science today tells us that it's in the skin, and the Quran seems to affirm this. Nostradamus, again, Google it and see how vague many Nostradamus' prophecies were and how many mistakes he has made in his prophecies. And did he get those prophecies correct because he actually forecasted it? Did he do some research in order to reach that conclusion? Well, maybe if that won't be miraculous, but Prophet Muhammad was saying some things that you really couldn't predict that way. He's saying it's not scientifically possible that Adam could be that tall. Well, you're the one who said that God is all-powerful. You're saying that God cannot create a human being who's 90 feet tall and give him a circulatory system which would match that and be suitable for that body. He says that ants were speaking to Solomon. Again, this is the miracle of God, and ants do speak, and God blessed. Ants do communicate, and God blessed Solomon with the ability to understand what the ants were saying. He's saying that the Quran says regarding the blood clot stage. Well, the Arabic word used there is alaqa, and classical, not modern, classical Arabic dictionaries such as Qamus al-Muhit say that alaqa could mean something that sticks. And the reason why the reason why blood clot got incorporated into that definition is because they believe that after blood dries out, it becomes sticky. But alaqa could mean anything that sticks, and that would be scientifically accurate. So you'd have to prove that the intention of the author of the Quran was blood clot in that verse. He said, but regarding the buttocks of the women, I won't be able to answer that argument because I don't know the hadith he is talking about. So I won't be able in this debate to be answering that argument. I'll check into it later, and I'll just recommend everyone to visit my website and see me address it then. Regarding, well, there was the temple of Herod, but as the temple of Herod in the Arabian desert, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was specifically talking about the Arabs in the desert competing on building tall buildings. The Euphrates River and the Mountain of Gold. Did we search every inch of the Euphrates River? Is that falsifiable? Regarding the prophecy, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, told them that the last hour will be approaching as this young boy ages. I've actually written an article on this issue, and what I found was that there were several different narrations regarding the statement of the Prophet. And in one of the narrations, the Prophet was saying to the companions, your last hour is approaching. Sa'atukum, your last hour is approaching as this boy ages. And in another narration, it's saying the last hour. This could easily be harmonized because Muslims believe that the last hour of every person is the time of his death. So in that narration, the Prophet was saying that the death of the companions were approaching. It was their last hour that was approaching as the boy ages. It wasn't speaking about the day of judgment. Bassam doesn't go to Bible commentaries in order to fix biblical contradictions. Well, you're actually making a statement about me which you have no knowledge of. You could believe me or not, but over the years, I have dropped many arguments I used to use against Christianity after I read Bible commentaries. Actually, John Gill's exposition to the Bible really helped me to not use certain arguments against Christianity anymore. It's just that with those particular arguments, I did not find any Bible commentary helping me. If you could find, you could refer me to them and I'll stop using the argument. I have no problem admitting that I'm wrong. And in regards to the contradictions that I showed in the Old Testament, David slew this many people, Solomon had this many stalls. J. Smith, a well-known Christian apologist who lives in the UK, in his response to Shabir Ali, he admitted that these were mistakes in the Bible, those very contradictions that I got. So the responses that I'm seeing from Christian apologists is that they're actually admitting that the mistake is there, and that the mistake wasn't there in the original copy, but that's not good enough as a response. The fly in your drink. Again, I mean, I really don't know how to prove this, or how you could disprove this. I mean, I could refer you to, go to islamlife.com, go to Sheikh Jalal's website, and you would see that he posted an article from ABC News that talks about researchers in Australia that are talking about how there is a cure in the wings for flies, etc. And you even said on your website, this statement doesn't appear to be a revelation from God, so maybe Muhammad was just passing some wife's tales or something like that. So even you yourself in your articles admit that this won't pose a threat to the Prophet of Muhammad. Again, David, I'm not understanding the point you're trying to make with these whole self-serving revelations. Are you saying that Muhammad had a motive for this or not? Regarding the Zainab story, I'm not saying that it's weak. I was just saying that in the particular part of the story where the wind blew and uncovered her legs is weak. And no, Zainab and Zayd were having difficult times in their marriages before this whole thing ever occurred. If you read the story, you'll see the sequence. You're saying, so was the Prophet's marriage to Zainab, was it self-serving? Again, are you saying that this was a motive for the Prophet to fabricate a verse from the Quran? He's saying that kissing the black stone is idolatry. It's only idolatry if you actually believe that the black stone has the power to assist you, but Muslims don't believe that, therefore it's not idolatry. Muslims believe that it's okay to kiss the Quran out of respect for the Quran, but we don't believe that we could seek blessings from the Quran. That's why we don't believe that kissing the Quran is idolatry. Same logic with the black stone. I'll try to address the rest of the arguments in my next rebuttal.
All right. Bassam says that kissing the black stone isn't idolatry. I think he missed the point here. My original point is that we're looking at Islam. Tons of false religions have come into the world. Tons of false prophets have come into the world. And when we go to a religion, we ask ourselves, is this from God? And so we look, how do we account for the origin of this religion? When we look to the origin of Islam, first thing we notice are certain spiritual issues like the satanic verses and black magic. Maybe you don't think that this rules out Islam. By the way, I'm not sure that these things would prove that Islam is false either, but they certainly raise some concerns. These are things that we look at and go, there's something wrong here. The next thing we would look for is this just something that was, some guy was in the right place at the right time, and that all these teachings came together. We find this phenomenon several times throughout history where two religions are meet, and then on the borderline you get some combination religion that's sort of a mixture of the two. So we look at Islam, and does this look like something that came down from heaven, or does it look like something that just formed because all of the elements were there at the time? And we see the various practices of Muslim worship, and we find those among the pagans. We find certain stories in the Quran that have no basis in history, and we find those among various heretical Christian groups. And we find all sorts of things, even the prayer times of the Muslims, among all these different groups, and so it looks like something human, something with a human origin. He says he doesn't understand what I'm saying about Muhammad's self-serving revelation. The only thing I'm saying, again, I'm not saying Muhammad was doing this intentionally. I'm saying nothing more than what Aisha herself said when she looked at this and said, it seems that your revelations seem to come down in fulfillment of your desires. That's all I'm saying, is that this looks like something human. Would this prove that Islam is false? I don't think it would, but it doesn't look good. As far as Bassam's arguments go, he appealed to science. He said, you wouldn't conclude that there's sensing in the skin. How on earth would you not conclude that the skin has a sensing feature? I can touch myself right now and I feel it. I feel it. I feel it. If you get burned, if you're a burn victim, you notice you don't have that anymore. You can't feel it. And so the natural conclusion is that the skin has a sensing feature. How can you claim that this is miraculous? He says, well, God could miraculously create a 90-foot tall Muhammad. Well, if you're appealing to a miracle, you're saying that this was a miraculous being and that God was miraculously upholding and sustaining this being. Well, fine, but even here, if you want to say that this is true, the story also says that people have been shrinking since the time of Adam. Now, if that's true, then when we go out and we dig up bones, we should find 30-foot long femurs. We should find 20-foot long shins. And we should see these decreasing as time goes on, but we don't find that. We don't. Regarding the fly in the drink, he says, well, there's an article that says, well, ABC News, researchers are looking at the fly. I already responded to this. Yes, researchers can study a fly. They can come up with ways to use microbes on the fly. That is very, very different from saying you should dunk a fly into your drink or into your food. If you're getting that, you're getting whatever germs might be on that fly. It could be typhoid, it could be all sorts of things. And this just isn't a good practice. He says, I admit that this could just be one of Muhammad's teachings. And my point when I said that this could just be one of Muhammad's teachings and not necessarily something he's claiming to be divine, my point there was just to say I don't use this to rule out Muhammad as a prophet. My claim is not, don't get me wrong here, my claim is not, look, Muhammad said things that are scientifically false. so he can't be a prophet. All I'm saying is Bassam is appealing to Muhammad's scientific accuracy as proof that he's a messenger of God. And if you're claiming that as the criterion by which we assess a prophet, well, when I look at the prophet's teachings, I better see pretty uniformly scientifically accurate statements. He says that Christians admit that there are errors in the Old Testament. Well, some Christians would. Ibn Taymiyyah admitted that the satanic verses story is true. What did he say? Well, who cares what Ibn Taymiyyah says? So you can't just appeal to other people. Regardless, pointing to these various things, again, you have the same thing in the Quran, in the Hadith. You have passages that look like they're at odds with one another. The difference is when he looks at these passages in the Quran, he's going to look for the way to reconcile them. In Christianity, he won't accept the way to reconcile them. Now, Bassam says he's dropped many arguments against Christianity over the years. I believe him. I'm not doubting that. What I'm saying is that he's inconsistent in the way he examines. If he's looking at Islam, he'll go to anything. He'll go to any reconciliation, no matter how weak it seems to be. Whereas in Christianity, he's demanding something much clearer, some much clearer reconciliation, and that's just inconsistent. I haven't addressed his falsifiability argument yet. He says that Muhammad told the Jews, if you believe that you have the true religion and you're going to heaven, well, long for death, seek death. And he says that this is a falsifiability test, and Muhammad passed this falsifiability test. Bassam says that if these people had just wished for death, Islam would have been falsified. Now this is just wrong. First of all, if I walk up to you and I say, you believe Islam is true? I want you to long for death. How many of you are going to just, okay, I'm going to long for death. I'm really going to want to. This doesn't even seem like something that's possible, to just walk up to someone and say, all right, start desiring to die. That's not something human beings would generally be able to do. But let's look beyond that. Bassam says that, well, if they would have just longed for death, this would have proven Islam is false. All right, now let's see what happens right here. Suppose Muhammad goes up to these people and says, long for death, you can't do it. And suppose they had said, all right, we're longing for death now. We're doing it. We're longing for death. Is this going to falsify Islam? No. Muhammad's followers will say, no, you're not. You're just making this up. You're lying. This is something you can't prove that you're longing for death. All you can do is say it. And Muslims aren't going to accept the word of a bunch of Jews as falsification of Islam. So this is not a falsifiability test. This is not a test that could even possibly falsify Islam. Maybe if you say, all right, we're going to hook up lie detectors and things of that nature, okay, but this is certainly nothing that could have falsified Islam in the 7th century. So we've seen that the argument from fulfilled prophecy fails. Muhammad himself said that even if you predict something accurately, this is not evidence of its divine origin. Regarding the argument from scientific accuracy, we've seen all kinds of problems with Muhammad's scientific claims. We haven't seen anything that's scientifically miraculous. And now Bassam's third argument was based on this falsifiability claim, which wasn't a falsifiability claim at all, and it would have been absolutely impossible to prove that Muhammad was a false prophet, and no Muslim would have ever accepted it if these people had claimed that they were longing for death. So we look at the spiritual issues. There definitely seems to be some spiritual problems in early Islam. We look at the human aspects. We see Muhammad gathering these teachings from the people around Mecca. Doesn't seem to be anything miraculous there. And now we've seen that all of Bassam's arguments fail. Well, what reason do we have to accept Islam? Absolutely none.
8 minutes. All right. Okay. Regarding the uppermost, the verse saying that Jesus' disciples are uppermost, just that Ibn Abbas and other commentators have understood that it means that they are uppermost in status with us today, because now we know today that they are the ones who are right. Islam came today to expose falsehood and to make the truth clear. So it means that they are uppermost in status. Regarding the other 27 narrations regarding the satanic verses, the issue is this: just as Dr. Mohar Ali illustrates, these narrations contradict each other on major points. So how can we really determine what are the true parts of the story here? Now David might say, well, that doesn't mean you can't dismiss the whole story. Yeah, but what parts of the story can I accept then? Maybe at the end of the day, the only part of the story that I could accept is that the Muslims were praying near the Kaaba and the Quraysh prostrated with them. How can we know what the true parts are by looking at all these contradictions? And no, our scholars didn't just reject the Satanic verse story simply because they didn't like it or it opposed the theology. They condemned the narrators. They condemned the chain of transmission. You see, there's two ways to critique a narration: by attacking its matan, meaning the content of the narration, and its sanad, meaning the chain of transmission for the narration. And all these scholars that I cited are attacking the sanad, the isnad, the chain of transmission. They didn't just attack it simply because they don't like what it says. So Bassam has no respect for early sources, for early testimony. No, I don't have respect for early false testimony. I have respect for early true testimony. I have respect for late true testimony. I have respect for all true testimony. But I have no respect whatsoever for any false testimony. It could be true, it could be late, whatever it is. If it's false, it's false. And the Muslims understood that logic. That's why the hadith methodology is superior to the historical method. Because the historical method only tells us if something is early. But the hadith methodology can tell us if it's early and true. And the Muslims understood this. The Muslims did not wait for hundreds of years in order to start the isnad system. The isnad system began right away after the Prophet's death. Abu Bakr applied it. Umar applied it. One time a companion was was trying to seek permission to enter Umar's house. Umar didn't answer him, so he left. Umar went out and called him back. The companion, his name was Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. He asked him, why did you leave? He said, because the Prophet said, seek permission 3 times to enter a house. If no one replies, leave. And then Umar said, get another witness that heard this from the Prophet. And if you don't, I'll have you beaten. So it's not like the Muslim said, oh yeah, I mean, it's only 2 or 3 years after the Prophet died. Who's going to make up stuff? Of course people will make up stuff. People made up stuff during the lifetime of the Prophet. Why won't they make stuff after the time of the Prophet? So just because something is early, it doesn't mean that it is true. Because the false assumption behind that logic is you're assuming that everyone living around that time is telling the truth. Couldn't Muhammad have just said how to deal with black magic? Did he actually have to undergo it? Well, again, that's only one possible answer. It's just one possible answer. I mean, Muhammad undergone black magic so that we could learn from his practical experience. But another answer to that is that the Quran says the prophets are tested the most, and then the pious believers. So this could be a test for the Prophet Muhammad himself. But on top of that, there is a moral lesson that you could learn from this, and that is, put your trust in God. Do not go to other magicians so that they can help you get out of the black magic that you're in. He said that Prophet Muhammad said that water is impure. Well, we'll have to look at the context of that statement, because all Muslim scholars are in agreement that if anything can change the color, smell, or taste of water, that water is not water anymore. You can't even perform ablution in it. So no one has understood the Prophet's statement that way. When you read the context of the hadith, the Prophet was basically saying that there was some dirt in a big area of water, and that small amount of dirt was not good enough to make the water impure. So we would have to see if the Prophet always said water is pure all the time regardless, then you'd make a point. But I guess we'd have to understand this statement in light of the other statements that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said. The sun sets in murky water. Again, I guess we went over this last week on the radio show, that this is only speaking from the perception of Dhul Qarnayn, and is not to be taken absolutely literally. If the newspaper says sunrise 5:30 a.m., you don't take that literally. It's just that the sun appears to rise from our perspective. And this is how people have been always speaking, and the Quran knows that this is the way people speak. And when the Quran says, yes, the sun is setting, we don't take the setting to be literal, it's the perception. And this is how earlier scholars have understood it. He said, well, the Quran says that sperm is produced between the backbone and the ribs. This is actually a pretty detailed topic. But what I could say for now is that there's a problem with the translations of the English commentaries, and that with the English translations, that we would need to go to the Arabic commentaries. The Arabic word sulb is best translated as loins, and the word tara'ib is actually referring to an arc of bones from the female's body, and it's speaking about something completely different. Unfortunately, the time limit won't allow me to explain it in any more detail, but it's not saying that sperm is produced between the backbone and the ribs. He said that, well, the argument from prophecies are not convincing because even Muhammad himself admitted that Satan can help fortune tellers. But first of all, I've proven that according to Christianity, you can't argue that Satan assisted Muhammad, and he didn't respond back to that. Secondly, just because Satan can help fortune tellers tell the truth and predict the future, that doesn't mean that every time we have someone predicting the future, that means he was helped by Satan. And not only that, he said that the fortune teller would also say some parts of the truth, and it would be mixed with 100 lies. So where are these 100 lies that Muhammad said? Again, I'm still not getting the point you're trying to make with the self-serving. What is your argument? You're saying, look, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that Muhammad had a motive. So what are you saying? What's the point of the argument? I want to understand. What is it that you're saying? You're saying, I'm saying nothing more than what Aisha said. What's your point? I don't know how to answer your argument if I don't know what your argument is. He's saying it's common sense that the pain receptors is in the skin. Obviously, that wasn't my argument. The argument is, how do you know that the pain stops at the skin? I mean, why is the Quran saying that once the skins have been gone, we'll replace them so that they could feel the pain? How does it know that the pain stops at the skin? Perhaps, if you want to use logic, I would think the person is suffering as long as he is conscious, and that even if it's burning his meat, it will still be suffering. He said, well, the Old Testament, he said, you're quoting a Christian scholar who said that there's mistakes in the Old Testament. Yeah, but I haven't seen a solution to the problem. I've given you a solution to the satanic verses problem. You haven't given me a solution to the Old Testament contradiction problem.
Was that it?
Yep.
Wait, I get 8?
8.
8, and then I conclude.
Yes. So you have 13 minutes.
All right. Regarding the spiritual issues, Muhammad rejected Jesus' death, resurrection, and deity. The only thing we're disputing now is what this verse in the Quran means when it says that God helped Jesus' followers become uppermost. I would say that in context, there's no interpretation available other than that's how the Christians rose to power. God helped them. And if that's the case, and we know what Christians were teaching, it certainly wasn't anything like Islam, then why would God help them? You can reinterpret it, but that's the point. You really have to stretch that interpretation. Concerning the satanic verses, he says that there are contradictions in the account of the satanic verses. True, but we have contradictions throughout the hadith. The hadith are notoriously inconsistent, especially regarding dates and times. So, do we throw out all of these sources? When we look at the hadith and we see that there are discrepancies of Muhammad's age when he died, do we throw it out and say, well, therefore Muhammad never died? Of course not. We look at this and we say, all right, we have these different stories, but what is the core? The core is that Muhammad died. Now, turning to the satanic verses, well, what are the core elements of these teachings? That Muhammad delivered some revelations to his followers, that the pagans bowed down in honor of these revelations because Muhammad had confirmed their goddesses, their pagan goddesses. And then Muhammad came back later and said, no, sorry, these verses weren't really from God, they were from the devil. This certainly calls into question Muhammad's reliability as a prophet. And keep in mind, Muslims who appeal to the Quran, it's so unique. Well, why didn't people immediately notice that there's a big difference between the true Quran verses and these other false verses produced by Satan? He says that the scholars who rejected this story only attacked Isnad. You missed the point. In fact, this story was accepted among the earliest strata of Muslims, It was only rejected after Muslims came to a different theological view. Then Muslims looked for a reason to reject the story. We've already seen Ibn Hisham tried to eliminate the story. Other Muslims were doing the same thing. So this is just a problem. Regarding the black magic, did Muhammad have to undergo it? He said that prophets are tested the most. Well, I just have to ask, if a prophet being a victim of black magic for a year doesn't count as a problem, if 30 chains of transmission reporting that your prophet delivered revelations from the devil doesn't count as a problem, what would count as a problem? I mean, if Muhammad had delivered 10 revelations from the devil, would that bother you? If he had delivered 100 revelations from the devil, would that bother you? Because it seems like whatever we look at, we see these problems, and Muslims say, no, it's okay. Well, it's not okay. It may be okay for you, but to someone coming from outside, these things are very disturbing. He says he still doesn't get what I'm saying about the self-serving revelations. The point of me bringing up the self-serving revelations is that these revelations, specifically these ones, I'm not saying all of it, these particular revelations seem to come from Muhammad's own mind, influenced by his desires. And if that's where they came from, they didn't come from God. Again, I'm not saying Muhammad was sitting in a room dreaming these things up, but this certainly looks like something very human. He says, Bassam says that he has no respect for early false testimony. The problem is, how does he determine what's false? It seems that all he does is he goes to whatever the sources say, and if it agrees with Islam, then these are reliable. If it disagrees with Islam, then it's not reliable. So he goes to the earliest Christian sources and finds over and over and over again, no matter where we go, that Jesus died by crucifixion, and he says, this is unreliable, this is false. Why? Why is it false? Because it disagrees with the Quran. Well, here, this would be a perfect opportunity to test the Quran, to say, all right, the Quran says something, now I can go out and test the Quran by looking at the evidence. But if you did that, you'd see that the Quran fails that test. So you have no choice but to reject the evidence. He says that the historical method is weak because it can only determine what's early. That is completely false. The historical method is far more than that. Historians go, true, early testimony is one principle, but it's only one. We've already looked at multiple attestation. We've looked at the principle of embarrassment. Historians have many other principles: enemy testimony, explanatory power, explanatory scope. Historians have all sorts of methods for weeding through questionable material to determine the historical core. And I would just like to say, if hadith methodology is the only way to arrive at any sort of facts of history, what else do we know about history? Because Muslims are the only ones who use this method. I mean, do we know anything about Julius Caesar? Do we know anything about Alexander the Great other than what might be in the Quran? No, not if this is the correct method. And if this is the best method, how come historians, non-Muslim historians, universally reject this method? Well, it's very simple. Isnad has a role, but Muslims use it for something where they go beyond what this should be used for. Isnad, if it really worked, could only confirm a true account. It could not rule out something as false. Think, did Muhammad do more than what we have in the hadith? Yes, he did more. So, the fact that we do not have an Isnad telling those things, does that mean they didn't happen? No, it doesn't mean they didn't happen. All sorts of things happen that we just don't have records of. So does Isnad rule out things as impossible? No. What it says is we don't have any good reason using this system to believe these things are true. Great, and you're right, Isnad doesn't have that method, but there is another method. Historians have principles that allow them to sift through this data. Regarding science, he says that Dhul al-Qarnayn, when it says that he found the sun setting in a muddy spring and that he reached the place of the setting of the sun, this was just from his perspective. This is just false. In Al-Tabari, we read a commentary from Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas said that he talked to Muhammad about his views, and Muhammad believed that there were 180 springs out on the edge of the world, and that the sun would go down into a different pool each day for 180 days. Abu Dar, one of Muhammad's closest companions, Muhammad asked him, do you know, Abu Dar, where the sun sets? He answered, God and his apostle know better. Muhammad said, it sets in a spring of slimy water. And by the way, this story, we know where this story comes from. It comes from a poem of a man named Tubal. We have it recorded in Ibn Ishaq. And in this poem, Tubal says that Dual Karnain got to the edge of the earth and he found the sun setting in a pool of murky water. This came before Muhammad. So it's clear what these passages mean. The other passages are wrong as well. So I just still do not see any reason to believe in Islam. So 5 minutes.
Go for the conclusion.
All right. As I begin my concluding remarks, we can wind things down now. I'll say that one of the most important purposes of public debate is to try and get people watching the debates, recording the debates, to become interested in studying these things and looking into the topics we're discussing. As you can see, even with 6 hours to debate, all we can do is scratch the surface of the relevant issues. With this in mind, I have a blog, answeringmuslims.com. Bassam and I certainly left many things unresolved. If you'd like to join there, you can leave your comments on the debate and issues that we didn't get to really address. Now, I think we've seen enough to know that Muhammad was a false prophet. We've seen that he tried to distort the gospel. We've seen that he proclaimed a God who is deceptive, limited in love, limited in justice. We've seen that the Muslim Jesus is totally incompetent, with nothing to show for 30 years of ministry, but a bunch of misguided followers and a false religion. We've seen how Muhammad admittedly delivered revelations from the devil, and we've seen that he fell victim to black magic. We've seen that Islam seems to be nothing more than a combination of the teachings of Judaism, Christian cults, and paganism. We've seen that Muhammad's revelations fulfilled his desires, and that even one of his own wives noticed this. So we have many good reasons to question whether Muhammad was the prophet, and indeed to reject him. But what evidence has Bassam given us to outweigh these difficulties? Well, he's argued that for the scientific accuracy of Muhammad's claims, we've seen that there are many problems with this claim. We've seen that even the arguments that Bassam appealed to are flawed. The argument from skin that someone just can't know that its skin is where the sensors stop. But again, that's wrong. Someone who gets the skin burned off will not feel the pain beneath these. Concerning the argument from fulfilled prophecy, again, Bassam rejects clear prophecies from the Old Testament. The prophecies Muhammad offered aren't very impressive to any non-Muslim. Otherwise, when we walk into a supermarket, we'd see little books about Muhammad's amazing prophecies being fulfilled, but we don't see that. We see Nostradamus. And even beyond this, even if Muhammad had predicted 1,000 things entirely accurately, Muhammad himself said that you cannot get evidence by this method. This is no evidence at all, according to Muhammad. So I'm not sure how you're going to say that Muhammad was wrong about his claim and then expect us to believe that he was a prophet. And finally, Bassam made his falsifiability claim. This argument didn't work at all. There's no way it could ever falsify Islam. So here we are at the end of 6 hours of debate, and we don't have a single good reason to believe that Muhammad was a prophet. But we saw in our debate on Christianity that we do have good evidence for Christianity. Now, admittedly, I didn't get to address everything in that debate. It's very easy to lay out a number of claims that might take 4 or 5 minutes each to seriously address them. But we've seen that the historical core for the Christian message is on very good grounds. Christians believe Jesus claimed to be divine. All the evidence we have tells us we're right. Christians believe that Jesus died by crucifixion. All the evidence we have tells us we're right. Christians believe Jesus rose from the dead. All the evidence we have tells us we're right. And we have the fulfilled prophecies. We have all sorts of evidence for the Christian faith. This is very different from what we've seen in Islam. So I encourage all of you to reject Muhammad and to believe in Jesus Christ, the risen Lord. I say Jesus can change your lives, my friends. If you'd like to meet him, I'd be happy to introduce you. God bless you all.
Okay, let me just address a few arguments regarding people shrinking from the time of Adam. I'll give 3 points for refuting this. First one, isn't it possible that these human bodies did exist such a long time ago that their bodies have disintegrated and cannot possibly be found by archaeologists? Because he's asking, why can't we find these bodies anymore? Why don't we see tall buildings, etc.? Secondly, does the hadith say that entire groups of people were as tall as Adam? If the answer is yes, then show me where. If the answer is no, then why do you claim that it's necessary that we find evidence of tall buildings and dwellings if you don't have evidence that Islam claims that several others were as tall as Adam? It only speaks of Adam being that tall. Thirdly, you as a Christian believe that human beings at one time were able to live for hundreds of years. This indicates that God might have created their bodies different than ours. So why is it so impossible for God to have created a 90-foot tall human being? Regarding the satanic verses, he said that Muhammad was waiting for a revelation to please the Meccans, and this came. But I gave a pretty convincing argument in my opening statement why Muhammad really was not looking for pleasing the Arabs. So I don't think that was a convincing argument. He's saying, well, what's the core of the story? Well, the very core of the story is in contradiction. There's really no reason to trust the whole story. But again, I even said, even if we were to assume that the story is true, it doesn't prove Muhammad to be a false prophet. Because at the end of the day, the very same story shows that God came and vindicated and exposed the plots of Satan. He's saying, well, earlier scholars accepted satanic verses. Who are these scholars? Don't tell me Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq has been condemned for his poor methodology in compiling information. He's saying, regarding the black magic, I don't want to keep going in circles on this. I'm just going to ask this. First of all, to what extent did the black magic affect the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? Did it affect the revelation? No, there's no evidence for this. Secondly, he didn't address the fact that the very story is evidence for the Prophet of Muhammad, because the angel Gabriel came and told him where the comb was and that it was in the well. And if he was all by himself and there was no angel to help him, he would have stayed under the influence of black magic. He's like, how does Bassam know whether something is true or false? By knowing where it came from and ensuring that where it came from is from reliable people, that I know who they are, that they're trustworthy, that they have good memory, etc., etc. And that's how I can know. And if there's multiple independent attestation for that. So hadith vary in degrees of authenticity. One hadith could have over 4 different chains of transmission, which are independent. So that's more authentic than a hadith that only has 1 chain of transmission. Bassam rejects the early gospel simply because he doesn't like what it says. That's not true. Go back to the first debate and you'll see why I rejected what those sources said. Because I saw that his earliest sources are not inspired, that they have incorporated mistakes, that they do misquote Old Testament passages, that they say that the Old Testament says this while it really doesn't say that. So I look at that and I see that this is not an inspired document. Now, was he able to give some overwhelming evidence in order to counter that? He wasn't able to. In our radio show, you gave that Ibn Abbas 180 Springs narration, and I was figuring that you would do the same today, and that's why yesterday I checked on that narration. It's fabricated. Again, if anyone's not showing any respect, it's David not showing any respect for Muslim scholarship. He's not showing any respect to Muslims. He doesn't care if he's appealing to our weak sources or not. It just doesn't concern him. He just wants to push his arguments. What else can we know about history if we don't use the isnad? Well, every case should be judged individually. I think that there's very good historical evidence for Alexander the Great. I mean, you have artifacts, you have left in his name, you have destroyed and conquered cities, which were due to him. You gotta view everything at an individual basis. And I think that the case that he laid out for Christianity, viewing that as an individual case, is not convincing. He's like, well, historians look at explanatory power, enemy testimony. Well, you don't have any enemy testimony from the 1st century to support your case. So it appears that you don't even meet the standards of the historical method which you claim to respect so much. Now, folks, David is right. I mean, we've only scratched the surface here. There's not enough time to go through everything in detail. I'll encourage you to watch this debate again and really look at the prophecies that I have laid out. He only attempted to answer 2 or 3 of them, and his responses weren't really that good. But the other prophecies that I've given are very specific. And as for the scientific accuracy, I think he only attempted to answer the one about the skin. And I'm not very satisfied with the response that he's given. I'll just encourage everyone to visit my website, www.call-2-monotheism.com. If you have any questions, I'll try my best to help. And I hope that this debate would motivate all of us to further our research on discovering religious truth. Thank you very much. That's the end of that. Good job, David.
All right, you too.